In 1984, David Tipton was a medical student doing his residency at an Alabama hospital. Here he met a nurse named Karen Kraft. At first, the couple communicated as friends, but gradually a romantic relationship began. 5 years after they met, the young woman told her brother and sister that David was ideal for the role of husband and father to future children. She considered him a great guy, a calm and pleasant young man with whom she decided to share her life. On June 24, 1989, the couple had a magnificent wedding, after which they moved to the small town of Decatur, Alabama. There, they found good jobs in a local hospital and had 2 daughters. The family lived an ordinary, quiet life. They attended church with their neighbors and appeared to be an exemplary family. Everything was going great until one day, March 12, 1999. 39-year-old David described it as an ordinary day for the family. Each day, he went about his business, looking forward to the evening when the whole family could gather for dinner and watch a TV show. After the birth of their children, Karen became a housewife and took care of everyday chores while David worked day shifts at the hospital. That evening, David returned home a little earlier because he and Karen were planning to go to the theater. As he walked from the garage into the house, he immediately suspected something was wrong when he noticed the door was unlocked. David understood this was unusual. They always locked their doors. At first, he didn't attach much importance to it. Perhaps Karen had forgotten, or she left it open for a delivery. However, as he entered the house, he noticed other alarming signs. The security alarm panel had been removed and was lying on the kitchen counter. This was strange, as the alarm system had not been working for some time, and they were waiting for repairs. David clearly remembered that the panel had been in its usual place that morning, and no security company visits had been planned for that day. When David reached the hallway, preparing to hang up his coat, he saw a small drop of blood on the floor tiles. There were no other suspicious marks, so he assumed it might have been an accidental nosebleed or a minor injury that Karen or the girls had received in his absence. He called for his wife, but she didn't answer, and the children were also silent. It was usually very noisy at that time. David figured that Karen and the girls might be upstairs and had not heard him. Just as he was about to head up the stairs, he noticed a few more drops of blood. When no one responded to his calls, his worry began to grow. He knew the children should be at home, so he called out for them again, but still no reaction. His concern heightened as he ascended the stairs and saw a pool of blood in the hallway. Next to the door, he noticed the blood was smeared as if someone had tried to wipe it up. The stain was quite large, and David became increasingly anxious, thinking that someone could have been seriously hurt given the extent of the bleeding. He called out to his family again, but still, no one responded. When he climbed the stairs, he immediately understood why the house was silent. Lying naked on the floor was Karen, her body almost completely covered in stab wounds. Shocked by the sight, he immediately dialed 911, saying that he had found his wife dead in their home and could not find their 2 children. A message had been sent to his address. Several police cars and an ambulance arrived. In addition, law enforcement officers immediately tried to locate the children. Fortunately, they discovered that the girls were still at school and no one had picked them up. The arriving police discovered a horrifying scene at the crime scene. They counted 28 stab wounds on the victim's body, some of which were fatal. Forensic scientists began examining the crime scene and determined that the time of death was approximately between 1 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. Around 1 p.m., Karen called her friend, and the 2 women talked for some time. The witness reported that Karen behaved calmly during the call. At about 2:30 p.m., she was supposed to leave the house to pick up the children from school, but she didn't do this. By that time, the mother was already dead. Of course, first, the detectives decided to talk to David, who had found his wife's body. They assumed he might have insights about possible suspects. However, he had no idea who could have harmed a 39-year-old housewife and mother of 2 children. Given that Karen was found naked, it was implied that the perpetrator might have had a sexual motive for the murder. The widower reported that Karen's purse was missing, along with some jewelry from the house. A ring with a diamond remained on the victim's finger. However, aside from the unlocked garage door, there were no signs of forced entry. Most striking to the investigators was the brutal nature of the attack. There was no indication of self-defense or a robbery gone wrong. The attacker clearly entered the house with the singular goal of committing murder. At the time of Karen's death, their eldest daughter Caroline was just 7 years old, and Catherine was only 3. Naturally, David became the prime suspect. He understood this perfectly when he called for help. However, the man had hope. He was at work during the attack and was not concerned about potential legal issues. It was expected that after the first police interrogation, any suspicions against him would be alleviated by his alibi. The police verified his alibi with the office manager, who confirmed that David left the hospital in a neighboring city only at 3:30 p.m. He arrived home no earlier than that, and the emergency call came in at 4:27 p.m., after he had already made the horrifying discovery. In the discovery at the house, there were no scratches on his face or hands, and no bloodstains on his clothes or body, so the man could not have committed a crime and was removed from the list of suspects. When the police crossed out David's name, it was a great relief. However, this was not the case for the detectives, as they reached a dead end. There were no more law enforcement officers or suspects. None of Karen's relatives and friends believed that the housewife could have such malicious enemies who would inflict 36 stab wounds on her. The police brought the FBI into the investigation to help compile a psychological portrait of the criminal. Several days passed, but even the joint efforts of the two agencies did not produce significant results. Agents and a profiler compiled a detailed report of more than 200 pages, on which the investigation relied. The murder of a beautiful, respected woman, the wife of a doctor, could not go unnoticed in such a quiet, peaceful town. The public was outraged. They put pressure on the police, demanding increased security on the streets. Rumors about the reprisal spread among local residents. Some believed that the killer was the husband, others suspected the lover, while a third group thought it was the wife of one of the lovers. The situation changed by coincidence just a month after the murder. The police were chasing a thief who tried to escape in a car, resulting in an accident. 20-year-old Daniel Wade Moore was detained. Just 48 hours after this, law enforcement officials were convinced that they had found the killer of Karen. 2 days after the arrest, when the young man was released on bail, Daniel made a confession to his uncle, Sparky Moore. He claimed that he was in the house of the doctor's wife on Chapel Hill Road. According to him, he and 2 accomplices broke into the house, believing no one should have been there during that time. However, they encountered Karen inside. Daniel said this took him by surprise, which led him to attack and kill her. This confession shocked the family. Sparky decided to act and admitted to the police that his nephew had killed her. Daniel was tracked down with the murdered woman in a motel room he had rented for several days, where a large amount of paraphernalia for the use and manufacture of illegal substances was found. The young man was detained and taken to the police station for questioning. After a few hours, the detectives left the room for a regular 5-minute smoke break, but it was enough time for Daniel to take out a penknife and inflict 16 stab wounds on himself. When the detectives found him, the young man was bleeding from numerous shallow wounds and was simply exhausted from the pain. Instead of interrogations, he was taken to the hospital. Given the behavior of the main suspect while he was recovering in a city clinic, the detectives were convinced they had a suitable suspect. Daniel had obvious problems with substances. Valuables were missing from the victim's house, and on the day of the massacre, he had no alibi. Additionally, his attempt to voluntarily end his life raised suspicions. During the first interrogation, they discussed his involvement in the murder of the woman, which seemed like more than enough confirmation of their suspicions. Nevertheless, it had to be proven. Security was on duty at the room of the wounded suspect, and detectives continued their investigation. They conducted searches in Daniel's apartment and found important evidence: a box with tools from a company that installs security systems, This organization had installed an alarm system in the Tipton house, and the suspect had worked there. Investigators interviewed the widower, David, who identified Daniel from a photograph. Daniel was the one who had come to the house a few months before the massacre to install the system. According to detectives, the broken security alarm system became the key to all doors for the attackers. The killer could simply knock on the door and claim to be a representative of the organization, a repairman who had come to restore the system. Karen could have recognized him and let him in, and he attacked her, taking her life. Since the suspect had not yet confessed, the police had to reconstruct the events using the results of a forensic examination and the evidence found in the couple's house. However, there was no direct evidence. No traces of fingerprints or DNA could be identified. Even the alleged rape did not leave any clues. For analysis, it is evident that the attack began on the ground floor near the front door, where a drop of blood was found. The first blow, as experts believed, was struck in the neck area of the victim. After this, the woman took off her sweatshirt, which was thrown on the floor, forcing her to go up to the second floor. She was slightly wounded and left behind a small trail of blood. At that moment, the woman managed to escape from her attacker and even ran toward the stairs. Unfortunately, here she was, caught and stabbed to death. Daniel's confession to his uncle connected him with the murder 100%. Law enforcement officials believe the young man matched the profile of a criminal capable of the bloody massacre created by the FBI profilers. In particular, investigators were based on his history of substance abuse. Acquaintances described him as a man with a short temper. At the time of the incident, he was likely under the influence of substances, leading him to lose control. However, when the suspect regained consciousness in the hospital and was able to communicate with investigators, he refused to admit guilt. Daniel insisted that he was not in the house on the day of the murder, did not know who was involved in the attack, and did not retract his confession to his uncle, claiming it was a lie. He stated that at that time he was struggling with legal issues and that his grandfather and uncle put a lot of pressure on him, which led him to confess to something he had not done. He made this confession specifically to scare off his uncle and get his relatives to stop interfering in his life. Of course, against the backdrop of the young man's actions, all this sounded like incoherent nonsense that no one believed. Unexpectedly, his uncle Sparky Moore took Daniel's side, believing the story was invented by his nephew as a diversion. Sparky insisted that Daniel was troubled only by his substance issues and wanted everything to end. He wanted to return to his old way of life but could no longer resist his addiction, as his grandfather and uncle actively tried to set him on the right path. Daniel just wanted to scare them with the story of a murder. Even some detectives began to doubt that this troubled young man could have killed Karen. The case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence against him. No direct evidence could be found. Several workers who laid asphalt in front of Karen's house on the day of the murder did not see Daniel enter the house. The Tipton family garage was flooded with blood, but not a single fingerprint was found. Searches in his apartment, motel room, and cars yielded no material evidence of his presence in the house. Now, almost everyone from the suspect's circle believed that he was not capable of such a crime. His older sister and mother insisted that despite his legal problems and substance use, he was a man of conscience and would never harm a defenseless woman. His history of substance dependence began in adolescence, and he had been brought to justice multiple times for this reason. However, Daniel had never before faced charges for violent crimes. He had never even attacked anyone. Daniel justified his attempt to take his own life as a nervous breakdown, insisting that he had never thought about killing anyone, stating that the only person he could point a gun at was himself. He simply lost control during the interrogation, fearing that someone else's murder might be pinned on him. In reality, he did not want to die, but desperately wanted to change his life and could not cope with the situation. According to him, the police put a lot of moral pressure on him during the interrogation, making him feel like a non-entity compared to his own family. The officers claimed that he would forever remain a criminal addicted to substances. At some point, he realized the situation. When the officers left, he couldn't find a better way to change his reality than to attempt to take his own life. Looking back, he regarded everything that happened as the biggest mistake of his life. Nevertheless, the police had no other suspects and were convinced that he was involved in the case. In October 2001, Daniel Moore was charged with murder, which, according to the laws of the state of Alabama, is punishable by death. His interests were defended by a lawyer who was 100% confident in his client's innocence. He was an experienced human rights activist with 30 years of experience who sincerely believed the investigation was mistaken. According to the lawyer, this crime was committed out of passion by someone close to the victim. A good candidate could be David Tipton. Generally, the list could be much more extensive. On November 4, 2002, the young man appeared in court. The prosecutor's office insisted that they had good reason to believe Daniel was the murderer. They continued to claim that the crime was a robbery that did not go according to plan. However, not all citizens supported the charges. People who followed the trial and knew the accused insisted that he was incapable of such an atrocity. Moreover, his main goal was funds for purchases, which means he could have chosen any target. First of all, a less noticeable house located in the city center, attacked in broad daylight while road service was working across the street. All this seemed far-fetched, and people were seriously afraid that the real criminal was still walking free. Perhaps the villain was dealing with another victim at that very moment. Additionally, even for someone under the influence of substances, the level of cruelty was prohibitive. The version of a robbery simply did not look believable since there was no reason for the criminal to kill the woman, even if she caught him searching for valuables in her house. An independent expert hired by the defense insisted that this murder was of a personal nature. Such clashes often begin as a simple conversation between people that develops into a tense argument, a fight, and ultimately a knife attack. The expert argued that the criminal could have entered the house in only two ways: either Karen let him in or he had a key. In either case, it was someone she knew. The specialist also studied the method of dismantling the alarm. The chosen method clearly pointed to someone other than the defendant. A former employee of the company that installed the security system knew how to disable it completely without removing the keyboard and leaving no traces. Obviously, he was not a professional. The expert examined the blood traces in the house and believed that the drops on the first floor indicated that the victim was not initially trying to escape. She was either standing still or moving slowly. She gradually climbed to the second floor, where she was attacked again. While trying to escape, the woman received several blows in the back that hit vital organs. According to the expert, this happened in the corridor on the second floor, where she ultimately lost her life. After beating her to death, the body was moved in such a way that it could not be seen from the first floor. This was clearly done by someone familiar with the layout of the house, someone who often visited or even lived there. The pool of blood on the second floor was wiped away, indicating that the criminal was trying to remove traces of the murder. This clearly would not be done by an attacker who came to rob, for whom every second is precious. The defense insisted that there could be several potential killers. The most likely candidate seemed to be Karen's husband, who was almost immediately written off. Traffic workers confirmed at the trial that they saw David's pickup truck near the house at least an hour before the police arrived. The defense argued that David had a motive rooted in banal jealousy. It was discovered that Karen had had an affair several months before her death, which could have served as a motive for the murder. A neighbor of the couple testified that she often saw a light-colored pickup truck parked near the family's house during the day. Additionally, during the trial, David himself admitted that a few weeks before the incident, his best friend Mike had sent Karen an email suggesting that they exchange partners for a while. David was very annoyed by this situation and felt betrayed by both Mike and Karen, who seemed to be secretly dating. It was also revealed that on the day of her death, Karen had been using David's computer and found a hard drive almost completely filled with adult films. This could have shocked and angered her after he returned from work, potentially provoking a conflict. David insisted that under any circumstances he couldn't harm his wife, as he sincerely loved her despite the situation. He considered any attempts by the lawyer to shift the blame onto him as manipulation and lies. However, the prosecution maintained that they had all the necessary evidence to accuse Daniel, albeit indirect. The entire case was built on 2 hairs without roots found in the bedroom, believed to be similar to Daniel's hair. Standard DNA tests were not suitable, so a simplified testing method was used which is significantly less accurate and cannot definitively identify a person. According to the expert who conducted the analysis, the hair did not belong to either Karen or David but was similar to Daniel's hair. However, it was impossible to guarantee 100% accuracy. This technique allows for the exclusion of 99.8% of the population, which means it only reduces the number of potential murderers to several hundred or even thousands. Nevertheless, the prosecutor's office insisted that of this remaining list, Daniel Moore was the only person capable of committing the attack. He had the means, motive, and opportunity. On January 23, 2003, Daniel was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. Since February, Moore became a new prisoner on death row in a correctional institution, but his fight for life had just begun. Just a few days after the verdict, a new witness unexpectedly appeared. A neighbor named PM stated that she saw Karen near the mailbox of the house at about 3:30 p.m. The neighbor insisted that she called the police immediately upon learning of Karen's death, but her call was initially lost and went unanswered. According to law enforcement officials, there was no record of this call. The prosecution believed that the neighbor's statement was not attached to the case because she was simply mistaken over time. According to the forensic expert, by 3:30 p.m., the woman was already dead. If she was still alive, then why didn't she leave for her children? All of this looked doubtful and implausible. The lawyer argued that the neighbor's evidence could not have just disappeared. It clearly did not align with the investigation's version, leading some to believe that the prosecution had hidden part of the evidence from the very beginning. A motion was immediately filed for a new trial. The further course of events forever changed Daniel's fate, which seemed predetermined. The lawyer found a 245-page report on the murder of Karen Tipton, compiled by FBI agents involved in the investigation. The prosecutor's office had previously denied the existence of this report, but it turned out to be a lie. The report detailed that Karen led a double life that included numerous extramarital affairs. This suggested that David and her lovers had possible motives for the murder. There were obviously many more men who could have entered the house and harmed her. It was recommended that David and his friend Mike undergo lie detector tests, as Mike had suggested they exchange partners. After this, David actively protested, calling all this speculation and not real evidence. In the end, even some of the jurors doubted the fairness of the trial and agreed with this opinion. The judge who passed the sentence accused the prosecutor and his assistant of deliberately hiding evidence to achieve a guilty verdict for an innocent person. Given the unfair decision, the judge signed a document that released Daniel from death row. This happened in 2005. During the same period, David and his 2 daughters were forced to flee to North Carolina because they became targets for the press. David felt he suffered greatly due to the rumors spread about him, which painted him in an unflattering light. As the media frenzy continued, shocking news emerged about Daniel's release. The family feared that the criminal would seek revenge on them. However, Daniel, having been released, claimed to see clear skies for the first time in 4 years, and stated he had rid himself of his addiction. Thus, he had no intention of seeking revenge. Unfortunately, this relief did not last long. The Alabama Court of Appeal reviewed the decision for Daniel's release and all proceedings were suspended. Just a week later, he was back behind bars. Now he had to remain in prison until the Court of Appeal made a decision. There were 2 possible outcomes: a new trial or double jeopardy. In the latter case, a repeat of the trial would be regarded as double jeopardy, preventing any further attempts to convict him for the same crime. In this scenario, Daniel would be released forever. During this time, human rights activist Daniela continued to fight. The prosecutor's office insisted on their version, considering Daniel guilty of murdering Karen. The lawyer tried to gain access to the computer and phone of the murdered woman's husband, suspecting him of involvement in the crime, but was denied many times. Finally, he received interesting information. Someone with access to the Tipton house deleted files from the computer after Karen's death, but before it was handed over to the police, and it was impossible to recover this data. All of this seemed suspicious. The defense lawyer again highlighted the testimony of the road workers who saw the husband arrive at the house an hour earlier than he called the police. They did not see anyone else at the house, which appeared to be direct evidence against the widower. The fight for justice took the lawyer a whole decade. In the end, Daniel, with a brief break, spent literally 1 week behind bars over the years following the third trial. On May 14, 2009, the jury decided that he was not guilty. This was a real shock for the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor publicly stated that Daniel Moore was the killer and that the jury made a big mistake. Daniel Moore left Alabama, seeking representation to bring a civil case against the city of Dadeville and its police department, claiming he was wrongfully convicted and that his constitutional rights were violated during his 10 years in prison. Daniel filed a lawsuit, but it was dismissed in 2011. He was later charged with burglary, admitted guilt, and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He is now free, but the exact identity of Karen Tipton's killer remains unknown. The case is still open. Could the killer be a man who still plays the role of a loving father for the daughters of the victim, who have now grown up? What do you think about this story? Did any of you figure out its outcome during the narrative? Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video.